Slides up. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Thanks for joining. We'll just give it probably 60 or 90 seconds or so for people to join, and then we'll get going. So make yourself comfortable and welcome. Hi, everyone. Again, just for those just joining, welcome aboard. We're just going to give it another 30 seconds or so, and we'll get going. So thanks for coming. All right. Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm joined by Alex, my colleague. We'll do some introductions in a little while, but we're going to spend probably the next 45 minutes or so just talking about the kind of human element when it comes to cybersecurity, risk posture, and how to use awareness training, if done correctly, to increase your level of business resilience. So as far as the agenda goes today, we'll do a quick introductions to myself and Alex, a little bit around the current environment as far as the kind of cyber threat landscape. It wouldn't be a presentation about cybersecurity if we didn't at least set the scene a little bit, and then we'll go into some examples of what triggers the threats that we have today, how you can put in place some tools and processes to action that, and then we'll give you some examples of the SensorNet security awareness training platform and how you might look to employ that in your business. So by way of introductions, my name is Gareth Lockwood. I lead product and go-to-market at SensorNet. I've been in the cybersecurity industry in B2B and consumer for a couple of decades now, in consulting, in product management and product marketing, and then I managed a well-known consumer antivirus brand for a few years. And I said my role here is to look after the strategy from products, so roadmap, and then also our go-to-market. So it's kind of why you're hearing from me today. I'll hand it over to Alex for a brief introduction. Alex, over to you.
Thanks, Gareth. Hello, everyone. So I'm Alex Thomas. I'm the Security Awareness Training Specialist here at SensorNet. So over 10 years experience in the industry, and specifically in terms of security awareness training, been involved in over 500 successful education, security awareness training projects, etc. But also, more broadly, leading large deployments within SensorNet. So some really exciting projects, lots of experience, lots of things that hopefully I can get across today in terms of benefits that we've seen as an awareness training expert provider, which I can share with everyone today. But thank you very much.
Brilliant, thanks, Alex. So as I say, we'll set the scene a little bit. The way we'll do this will be a bit of a game of two halves. I'll kind of set the context, and then Alex will kind of pick up the baton and run us through to the end. But just to kind of set the scene a little bit, some stats from a mixture of sources, predominantly Gartner, and then the UK government recent surveys that they've done, there's some really interesting stats and trends that we've seen. First things to look at is, it said down the left, 32% of businesses actually, if you look at the whole landscape, slightly less in charity, so about a quarter of all charities recall or have knowledge of a breach or attack in the last year. And if we look at the wider landscape in the mid-market, that's actually a lot higher. So it's around 60% of businesses. Obviously, large enterprises are also big targets where the numbers are even higher. But it's across the landscape. Even charities, charities of £500,000 plus of income, more than half of those are attacked. So everyone is a target, and from those targets there, about a third or so end up actually being a victim. So that stat there talks about having knowledge of an attack. Whether that attack was successful or not is actually significantly lower, but about a third of those businesses have actually ended up being a victim. So that could be a website being taken down, loss of access to their files, systems corrupted, data altered, or money being stolen, and the financial impact. The average cost of cybercrime in the UK is about just over £15,000 per victim, which for some small businesses could be critical, disastrous. For some larger enterprises, you may it's part of doing business, but it goes way beyond just the kind of financial impact. There's the reputational damage, there is the recovery costs, and the impact on staff and customers. So you need to think about this kind of a little bit more holistically. And if we look at those people who've identified a breach or an attack in the past month, about 40% of those have said, actually, we've seen this more than once a month. Actually, about a fifth of those businesses see an attack every single week, which is, it's pretty scary. And as I said, even though breaches might not necessarily result in kind of negative financial consequences, they still have an impact on your organization, and you can kind of quantify that. Most commonly, a breach would mean you'd have to redirect staff to deal with it. You've got to really take up new measures to prevent that in the future. And really, the tip of this is phishing. About 80% of all businesses have had a phishing attack in the last 12 months, right? And really, that's just the tip. If we look at the mid-market sector, it's actually a lot higher. It's about 85%. And then secondary to phishing comes things like impersonation attacks. So what we call business email compromise, pretending to be an executive in the company asking for something, or a trusted partner. It's really focused around social engineering, not as much as it was in the past where it was focused on malware or, hacking of devices. It's really social engineering, looking to take over an account. At that point, you then look for potentially bank credentials, or you might want to deploy some ransomware at that point. But it's really about getting in. And it's the phishing attacks in this instance that really are the most disruptive. And, when we look at the headlines, it's a pretty scary thing, right? The harsh reality is here, cyber attacks, cybercrime, it's pretty business agnostic, right? The cyber criminals tend to go for the weakest links. They want to look at, the human, the person who's sat at the end of that email when it's a phishing attack, for instance. And phishing is consistently the most common attack method. They're easy to do. It's cheap to carry out. You can do it from anywhere in the world. And it only takes a tiny percentage of people to actually fall for it to become lucrative and the potential there for the bad guys. So you might click on a link and inadvertently give away your login credentials for Office 365, or you might open an attachment that has malware in it, or you follow a malicious link to a file hosting service that has malware in it. It doesn't take much for it to be really worth it for the bad guys. And unfortunately, cybercrime is endemic, right? The effect on the business, as you can kind of see from some of these newspaper articles, which are taken over the past couple of months, it can be devastating, right? And prevention is better than cure. That kind of head in the sand approach would literally just make it open season for the bad guys. They'll kind of laugh all the way to the bank almost, when it comes to benefiting from this. So as this frequency of cyber attacks and phishing attacks continues to grow, making sure that not only your cybersecurity technology is watertight, your people, your users, your partners have to also have that mindset of being safe, such that then your clients and your customers' data is also safe. So, it's not only that, but it's also thinking about operational impact. So you want to make sure that any unwanted downtime is kept to a minimum, reputational damage, the compliance and regulatory fines are absolutely kept down, and obviously the bad press that comes with it through an attack. So it has to be front of mind for everyone within your organization. So little bit of a pop quiz, and don't expect everyone to kind of respond or put this in the chat, but just to start thinking about this at the moment, when we think about how much of these attacks start with the human element, what do we think? Take a guess at how many in 10, or what percentage of these attacks start with or involve a human. And I'll give you a clue. It's a pretty big number, and it's quite surprising for a lot of people. It's 82%. It's a monstrous number, and this data was taken from the Verizon data breach, which they do annually, and the trends are relatively flat year on the year. Whether it's the use of stolen credentials, or a phishing attack, misuse of company assets, or even just an accident or an error from oversharing data. People continue to play the largest role in incidents and data breaches throughout the globe, and that really puts the person, us humans, at squarely in the center of this security estate that we as businesses have to manage. The ability to socially engineer someone is a lot easier than trying to break into security protected technology. Once that phishing attack has gone in, and the person at the end of the line has been socially engineered, getting credentials or being able to deliver a piece of malware actually is relatively straightforward. And unfortunately, strong asset management, the latest and greatest vulnerability scanners and technologies do not guarantee 100% protection. You have to change the behavior of your users, your partners, and that's actually quite an undertaking, unfortunately. So, second question, and again, something to think about. How many companies, organizations have an awareness program or some kind of function that focuses not only on the technology aspect but also the human factor within this? And again, it's a big number. Over 90% of security functions or organizations claim to have a formal program of training or policies when it comes to cybersecurity. Great, that's a good number to have. The problem is here that whilst most cybersecurity leaders want to mitigate the risk by managing employee behavior, actually very few of those track compliance or measure the efficacy of the solution that they're deployed. So absolutely the ambition is there, but the reality is more of an unknown. When it comes to actual, tangible, measurable outcomes from your awareness programs, the reality is far from the truth. So, what's going wrong? And I said, if there are so many formal policies and procedures in place by over 90% of companies, why are we still seeing all these breaches stemming from human behavior? Well, if we look at it in a little bit more detail, unfortunately, users are choosing risk over security. And that's something that we see time after time after time. And unfortunately, the numbers don't really inspire confidence, unfortunately. This data is taken from a recent Gartner survey that, the tagline was, basically over 90% of employees have admitted to undertaking a really wide range of actions during their kind of day-to-day work activities, knowing full well that they're increasing the risk of the business, knowing that there could be potentially disastrous consequences, but they did it anyway. They chose to do it. And, over 2/3 of the people that did this actively looked to bypass the security measures that were put in place by the organization that are there to mitigate risk, to make their kind of job easier or achieve an outcome. 3/4 of the people within this survey said they would absolutely bypass a security measure if it helped them achieve a goal. You've got to kind of look at that and say, well, why? What are they trying to achieve here? And it turns out actually it's mainly speed and convenience. They are trying to make their jobs easier, with less friction, with all the measures that are put in place in security. And closely following that kind of speed and convenience thing was that the perceived benefits of what they were trying to do actually outweighed the potential risk of their activity in their head. So if you think about it, when organizations are striving for growth, they're trying to scale rapidly, these IT security and cybersecurity programs often lag behind a lot of the kind of mission facing units. So if you think about it, if you're on a commissioned role, your take home pay, your compensation depends on an objective that could be at odds with the restrictions of cybersecurity, then there's no incentive for you to be safe, right? This needs to become part of company DNA. No one will ever argue with profitability or whatever your mission success criteria is, right? It's a core value, it's a core metric. But often security can be at odds with that, especially if there is a cost associated with that security, then often it gets a lower priority. And I've spoken about this in webinars and panels previously. If you compare asset heavy industries like oil or mining or transportation or energy or utilities, safety is always on a par with profitability. Accidents are thankfully few and far between because the potential for human problems and kind of critical outcomes is high. Yet in data heavy industries, we just don't have that level of importance. It should be core to the value proposition of the company, not a separate thing. So the kind of headline takeaway from this is that although there has been this big uptick in the last kind of decade or so in awareness programs, the reality is very different. Computer or internet-based security awareness training hasn't really triggered the same level of outcome. We have Cybersecurity Awareness Month, October, I think it is at the moment. Everything is there to make it front of mind, yet we still have these high levels of breach. And I guess while many vendors' core capabilities are developed to achieve regulatory compliance or they're there for an audit, there is potentially some, I guess, rudimentary behavior change, but they're effectively tick box exercises and people know it. They fail to make a real impact when it comes to changing human behavior. But I think the good news is that's starting to change. By 2030, it's estimated that over 80% of organizations are going to have a much more formally defined, well-resourced, measurable, which is the key thing here, human risk management program. So for reference, currently today, that sits at about 20%. So a lot of work is required. And really, this means that all the controls, the training that is centered on the human factor will have to focus then on measurable behavior. That change management has to be a metric of efficacy of the program you put in place compared to things like compliance-based training, which we see a lot today. And Alex will go into this in a lot more detail in a little while, but it's really about how can you deliver tangible, scalable, sustained behavior changes that mitigate this risk from cyber and hopefully in the long term bring those breaches down. So, a little bit more color behind this. And again, Gartner has some really good data that illustrates that, quite often the aim of security awareness training doesn't actually match up to the reality. Well, most of these companies have kind of an objective or a goal to really positively shape their users' behavior when it comes to risk mitigation. In actual fact, over half of them say they don't actually measure behavior. So how can you tell if it's working or not? How do you know if it's starting to become ingrained and embedded into culture? If you can't measure the problem, then you can't manage it. So as a security function, over half of the people that Gartner surveyed, and this is, we hear this time and time again in the mid-market, people don't have a full-time dedicated resource or a head to staff awareness training, right? It's pretty rare actually to find a full-time person, especially in the mid-market, to dedicate their time to the human element and staff training. And that's where you really need to deploy tools and services that are really an extension of your own team, that take the burden away from the people who are trying to juggle this as part of their other duties in managing the technology and the tools as well. So that's something that really needs to be taken on board by a lot of organizations. And, you know, the key problem here, I guess, is that, you know, it's not becoming part of company DNA. It's not part of culture. And there are really probably 2 or 3 key reasons why organizations aren't building culture around cybersecurity. You know, firstly, we see this a lot. Cybersecurity is approached, obviously from a culture perspective, is approached kind of a little bit ad hoc. It's not a systematic approach like, you know, the anti-malware tools or phishing tools or the technologies that are put in place. You know, secondly, the cybersecurity teams themselves, they're not really proving or communicating the value of cybersecurity in general. And then how that then boils down into culture. So, you know, yes, your CISO or your IT leader might communicate it at an executive level or even at a board level, but that needs to trickle down to every function within the business. They need to know that everyone plays a part in cybersecurity. And then finally, the approach to then building this culture, as we see it, is far too general. You know, it doesn't take into account cultural differences, you know, regionalized language, you know, how you talk and communicate about a threat. You know, they seem to be very generic. So again, that's something that needs to be worked with and ingrained into the company's processes. So as we kind of wrap up the kind of context side of it, the kind of final bit of Gartner research here, this kind of talks about the core activities that are being done. You know, the tactics of deploying simulated attacks, formal training content. You know, that's kind of widely adopted, but it's got to be more than that. You know, absolutely. Social engineering is the main attack vector. And as we know, you know, the vast majority of breaches involve a human. So that human element has to be the key focus. But the content has to be engaging. It's got to be personalized. You know, it's got to be relevant. It's got to be kept up to date. Otherwise, it just becomes, you know, part of the furniture, and people kind of revert to this tick box exercise when it comes to what they class as mandatory training. So, you know, to tackle that kind of resource and staffing burden that we talked about, the whole journey from end to end for the user's got to be automated. It has to be measurable. Otherwise, you know, what's the point? And that's really then going to help to drive towards this kind of digitally secure culture that we're all striving for, and hopefully we'll go on to kind of reduce the breaches. So to kind of wrap up, you know, from me, you know, how do we go about building a culture? And I'll hand it over to Alex in a second to go into the detail. But, you know, what we're trying to achieve here is, you know, security awareness training becoming ingrained into the DNA of a company. It's part of culture. It's part of the core value proposition. It's got to be relevant. And, you know, it's got to be as important as the other aspects of the business. So when we look at what we're trying to achieve at Sensinet, you know, our technology from a training perspective is integrated into a much wider platform covering, you know, email security, web and cloud application security, and identity management. You know, the idea being that they work hand in hand. You know, you can fine tune your appetite for risk through this balance of controls and rules and policies from a technology perspective, but also balanced with user training. So you're effectively maintaining this really solid risk posture, but without putting in place friction for your users, which we know will try and find a way around it if it's too strict. And, you know, to do that, you've really got to deliver on every aspect. You know, if the human element or the human factor is given the appropriate focus, the content you deliver, it's got to be engaging and impactful, and it will then materially start to change people's behavior and shape their behavior. And what you'll happen is you'll end up with all the stakeholders sharing in the same goals. So, you know, all the leaders across the business are brought into strategy. You know, it's not just the CISO or the security team trying to push a security agenda that doesn't resonate with sales or with HR or finance. When it comes to the exec meetings, everyone's got to be rowing in the same direction. The byproduct of that is you will absolutely achieve your compliance goals much more effectively than these traditional kind of tick box exercises. So with that, I'll take a pause and I'll hand it over to Alex, and we'll go into some more detail and you'll get some more insights as to what this looks like in practice. Alex, over to you.
Thanks, Gareth. Some really interesting stats there, so thanks for sharing those. And I think that last point that you've just made there is the key, that sort of holistic common goal across the organisation. And I think, as you mentioned there, Gareth, that buy-in from senior stakeholders is critical, really, to ensure that they're leading by from the front, and it's really is a common goal of the organisation that does align with the profitability side of things. And I think the approach that SenseNet has taken with the security awareness training piece is to minimise any sort of potential pushback from other areas in the organisation. So, for example, making sure that training is, yes, engaging, relevant, kept up to date. That's a common goal, that if we're going to ask our staff to obviously spend time to do training, we want to make sure it's valuable and not only helping them in the workplace, but also when they're externally away, with their friends and families, etc. But again, things like the time element, making sure that the training is short, snappy, we're not taking a substantial amount of time out of their day, is really important, and aligns with that common goal. The fact that training can be accessed on multiple devices. A lot of people on this call today will have either all or part of their workforce that is either remote or on the road. So things like that need to be really taken into account when thinking about what it takes to be a successful, inclusive security awareness training program that ultimately drives that security culture that we're looking for moving forward. And I think if we look at the from my experience and the wider experience that SenseNet has around the perfect campaign, things like that sort of senior stakeholder buy-in are critical. Making sure that the regular and often approach is brought in and sort of built into that program is really key. And again, alongside the stats from Gartner, there's been a lot of research done into the retention of information. Our lives, our working lives, revolve around updates and lots of numbers, lots of updates around sort of new processes, etc. So if we are only, or have been previously, only training staff on an annual basis or on induction, and having maybe an annual refresher, even a 6-monthly refresher, it's no wonder that users are starting to sort of forget important information and make mistakes. I think some of the latest research demonstrates that within 28 days of someone doing some training, they will actually retain a maximum of 20% of that information. So if we start to sort of visualize that as a concept, as I say, it's sort of setting ourselves up for failure in these areas. And I think from what Gareth mentioned and the research from Gartner, that's been a lot of the challenges for people in the past that have just been looking to tick a box. Yeah, we've sent some training out, and people have done it, so therefore that's solved that as a problem. Well, as the information and the stats have demonstrated, that's not enough. If we're doing it, it needs to be relevant. It needs to be not only relevant to that particular user and the organisation, but also to people's personal lives, to make sure that we make that change in the culture of the organisation. People are now thinking about IT security and the best practices 100% of the time, rather than, oh, I'm in the workplace, I need to switch on. I think that's really critical, because often a lot of these mistakes are made when people are under significant pressure. So when they've got certain deadlines or there's a lot of work going on, etc. That's often when organisations are targeted, because the hackers know that people under pressure at certain times of year will make mistakes. And as Gareth said, it only takes one person to make that mistake and the consequences can be substantial. So if we're building all these things in, the regular and often approach, using multiple different mechanisms for training in an engaging style, we can really start to change that cybersecurity culture and ensure, most importantly, that users are retaining that information. And again, there's just a few ideas there of how we can do that, from sort of posters on specific topic areas, courses on specific topic areas, simulations that are aligned to realistic scenarios that are being seen in the current industry or maybe specific to your organization, alongside obviously the wider training pieces and collateral that you'll be using internally for your organization. All these aspects have to be sort of built in to make sure that it's aligned with the I suppose that common goal of reducing risk within the organization, but delivering it in a way that works for the modern working scenario that we find ourselves in. So in terms of that that risk reduction, we basically utilize a proven methodology that incorporates, I suppose, 4 key areas, and you can see those on the screen now. Sort of identifying high risk users, educating them, reporting on that to ensure that we can obviously have that common goal of actually demonstrating the progress that we're making and perhaps making comparisons to others within the industry. And then it's repeated on a regular basis, and that's the bit that a lot of organisations are perhaps not doing, or if they are, it's maybe sort of less often than we see being effective. Which, if we're summarising what the regulators are saying, it's that sort of monthly, that 28-day cycle is how often we need to be doing that. And it doesn't need to be a half an hour or an hour long refresher. That sort of bite-sized maximum 5 minutes on a monthly basis is more than enough to make sure that the key best practice pieces of advice are retained by your users. And again, that's built very much into the SensorNet approach. So what we typically start with is an onboarding call, normally around 45 minutes, whereby obviously we get things set up with any new customer, but there's always a plan around that approach. And we obviously have a tried and tested way of doing that is obviously aligned to specific industries, incorporating different templates, different scenarios, etc. Gareth mentioned around the language element of making sure that we have in-region simulations and training, etc. All that is built into the plan, but there's also wider elements around posters, infographics, newsletters, everything else that is combined with that approach to make sure that we have maximal impact and engagement with your staff to really buy into that cybersecurity culture of the organization. Just a few ideas here in terms of, typical phishing journeys that we have, where we combine a whole host of up-to-date and relevant templates to test susceptibility. I think it's really important here to note that phishing simulations are being used as part of the education. We're not trying to catch users out here, and the various landing pages and experiences that users will receive if they unfortunately do click on any of those simulations are very much built to help and support users and refresh them on, actually in hindsight, what you should have spotted is X, Y, Z, and these are processes that you can adopt very easily and quickly to avoid that scenario actually happening for real in future. But again, supportive, helpful, building the right processes to build that cybersecurity culture moving forward. It's a similar approach with the learning journey, and again, we align a lot of our training with, regulatory advice, obviously in the UK, NCSC guidance, etc. But simple steps in a jargon-free way that relate to people's personal lives has been, really well received by, many hundreds of thousands of customers globally. But it's important that it's done in a way that's engaging, relevant, and in a timely fashion to obviously fit with the overall goals of any organisation. And it's repeated. So I'll just give you a few snapshots of what some of those scenarios look like in terms of simulations where we can track who's potentially clicked on an email, who's filled out any credentials, and then, as I say, in terms of what happens to those users, whether it's a 404 page just to get a benchmark and not raise too much awareness in the organization to see where we are without any further training, through to landing pages that make users aware in that moment around what they should have done or spotted. The hints and tips page is really handy, actually showing a user the email they've just clicked on and actually highlighting if they'd hovered here or there. I've just jumped off a call actually where actually reinforcing the processes that users should go through. So for example, if it looks like an internal email that looks a bit dodgy, or it's a bit urgent around buying gift vouchers or whatever for senior staff, actually get on the phone, use a number that we know is valid, speak to that person rather than taking that action. And it's about just reinforcing, hopefully everyone on this call is aware of those processes, but just reinforcing these things on a regular basis and giving the user a sense of confidence to handle these things, not to be scared by them. We know it's a matter of fact that these things will be coming through to inboxes, but it's been rest assured that users are being armed with the very latest best practice advice to obviously validate these things and obviously follow the right processes if they're still unsure, to reduce that risk. One of the things that we found really, really useful is actually the co-branding element. As Gareth mentioned, rather than just a tick box off the shelf element that's got no relation to anything that we do as an organization, actually really building into the company brand. So it's now part of the company culture. So, that's worked really well. We've actually branding these up, customizing these specifically to the processes that we have within the customer's organization that we work with. And again, as part of that approach, part of the planning, this is all incorporated and part of the automated solution that will be provided to customers. So this has worked really well and has had a lot of positive feedback, not only from our customers, but more importantly, the users that are receiving these elements, because they're not feeling like they're being caught out. It's a helpful, it's a supportive approach that ultimately changes the cybersecurity culture. And whether that's, Microsoft Security Alert emails, which again are probably one of the most common attack vectors that we're seeing at the moment across multiple industries, where we're tracking who's clicked, filled out credentials. The Microsoft Teams elements, a lot of organizations have or are moving towards Office 365 and the cloud. So, I think, as Gareth mentioned earlier, the rise in business email compromise and the consequences of that are substantial. So we do need to make our users aware of, the risks around that. And I think, as Gareth mentioned, I think with one of the slides around that, people are still choosing to make the wrong decisions because perhaps security is becoming in the way of their day jobs. I think if there's an understanding of why the security team are asking people to do certain things and the consequences of mistakes that can be made that are relatable, people now can start to understand it's not just a silly request to slow me down. Actually, there's substantial consequences that could come for me and for the organization if I try and sort of circumvent a process. And I think that greater awareness and the relevancy of that, not only to the organization but to that individual, all start to help sort of drive those right behaviors, and more importantly, sustain them for the long term. So just a couple more examples of the templates, but I think the main thing is we have a vast library of relevant, up-to-date templates that our in-house content creation team are continuously reviewing. We're obviously, given what we do as a wider vendor, we have a lot of useful information around live threats that across different industries that we ensure are built into that learning journey for our customers to make sure that we're training users on the very latest and up-to-date elements. And we have specific examples that are perhaps more relevant for certain departments within the organization, and we can actually customize journeys for different groups of users. So if you're a retail organization that perhaps has a certain user group that maybe in store that perhaps have less access and want to do maybe a less regular journey for those people versus perhaps your head office core team that obviously are in every day accessing all sorts of applications, so we can really vary that up, but most importantly automate that process for you, which I think is important. And it's these little nuances that are very difficult with a lot of platforms. If you're trying to do this yourself, that has been built into the SenseNet platform from day one to ensure that we ensure the success of this program moving forward. And finally, the other area is obviously the educational side of things that builds on the simulation education. And as Gareth said, we need to start building that wider culture, and things like posters, infographics, newsletters. Again, it's another way that we can ensure that these messages are retained by staff without actually taking time out of their day. So whether they're off to the bathroom to grab a coffee, if you've got sort of depots or office areas that shared common rooms, or actually if you're a remote business or organization whereby you've got intranets or newsletters that are sent around to staff, these are a great way to continuously reinforce the key messages. And again, I think the call that I just came off, it's about reinforcing the processes. So again, really clear, simple, steps, around sort of checking this, checking that, and a process to do that is really important to changing cybersecurity culture of the organization. Now, in terms of the training aspects, so we have a variety of training options, all of which can be supplied as a SCORM package if you have your own learning management system. But we also have our portal, which benefits from single sign-on, either for G Suite or Office 365, which is really, really useful because there's no extra usernames and passwords. So it's a seamless, simple access for users straight into the portal, and that's where they can access their training exercises, which, as I said at the beginning, is a maximum of 5 minutes long. Short videos, there's quizzes that are built in to reinforce those key learning points, and again provide another area of confidence that not only we tick in the box, i.e. people are doing the training, but more importantly, we can measure that training is being retained and that users are taking away the key messages. And I think hand in hand with the simulation data and the risk scores that we pull that compare different industries, you've got a number of metrics there to sort of demonstrate the overall success of the platform and the program, but also you can highlight areas of potential weakness in the organisation that perhaps need readdressing, either further training, and obviously that's where you can obviously do that with further SensorNet training, additional resources, or perhaps in-person events that you can sort of call with your high-risk users in specific locations or departments, etc. So it's that greater awareness around that risk that is critical to the success of driving down risk and ultimately improving that cybersecurity culture. I've got a few snapshots there of the engaging training videos that again cover the full breadth of cyber awareness, whether it's phishing specific, which as Gareth said tends to be one of the top attack vectors used at this moment in time, or things like use of public Wi-Fi, etc. Social engineering is a really big one at the moment across multiple industries. Refreshers on GDPR. A lot of organisations haven't spent a great deal of time doing GDPR training in recent years since it came out. But again, these are all important things that every user should be aware of from a high level to reinforce that best practice. Now, the final area that I think brings everything nicely together is the reporting side. So, I've touched on the ease of use, the very minimal, I suppose, resource and effort to maximal value in a quick space of time, and that's also demonstrating the reporting side of the solution. So you have ready-made dashboards that I suppose show you that compliance view that can be pulled out with a click of a button or automated to email inboxes, etc. That's really important, which shows the compliance. But as Gareth mentioned, it's actually understanding that information, and the dashboards provide that proactive view of actually where we're going as an organization, that progression that we are making, that demonstrates the progress that users have made, and ultimately that the training program that we've put in place is being successful and is continuing to be successful as threats change over time, but also highlighting areas of potential weakness or perhaps improvement. So actually you can start to use these dashboards to demonstrate progress, i.e. one department might have been one of the highest risk areas of the organization, but actually over the course of 6 to 12 months are now one of the best areas. And we've had many customers provide sort of reward schemes and other incentives to really drive that positive cybersecurity culture in the organization. I think these are the things that really help sort of change the culture and take security to not only being sort of a certain group within the organization, but actually every person that works for that organization is now part of the cybersecurity team. That report of a potential threat, either a phishing email or another threat, actually please do embrace that and bring that to our attention, because that could be the difference between a breach and not being a breach. And I think that accountability and making sure that everyone's aware of the part that they play is really important to sort of come together as that common goal that Gareth talked about towards the beginning of his slide deck. So I think just to finish, I think just to pull that all together, based on the data that we've obviously been through today and the advice from likes of Verizon, Gartner, etc., and obviously SensorNet's own research and experience in this industry, it's all around actually obviously providing that holistic approach that delivers value in a quick space of time, and ultimately the key areas of that are automation, so ensuring that this is just built into the culture of the organization, regular and often relevant simulations and training that are obviously specific to the organization and relevant to users is key to that. So that's what we deliver as part of our automated approach. And I think the other side of it is the engagement of the training. So it's short, it's snappy, it's relevant, but most importantly, accessible in a really simple and easy way that's taking a maximum of 5 minutes, typically once per month, but it doesn't have to be that way. But as I said earlier, that retention of data and information, that 28-day cycle, is really important, that we are refreshing and keeping these core metrics at the front of people's minds. So hopefully some really interesting elements there. I'm conscious that we are probably a little over on the time, so we were hoping to run through some questions, but if there are any questions that anyone has, and I'm sure there will be, please do pop those in the chat now, and we'll be sure to follow up with any of those. And obviously if any of you on the call would like some further information or sort of understand a bit more around how SensorNet can obviously support them with their security awareness training requirements, then please do obviously pop in the chat as well, or get in touch, and one of the team will be more than happy to follow up with some further information and obviously share with you how we're supporting similar organisations to yourself. But yeah, I'll hand back to you quickly, Gareth. But personally, thank you for everyone's time.
No, thanks very much. I have some really good insights there. I think if I was just to summarise, it's really to reiterate what we say. We've kind of gone through the why and the how. having an end-to-end platform that not only covers your security elements, so by protecting your email channels, your web and your cloud application channels, being able to see who are the most targeted users, who are the riskiest users, and then feeding them, as Alex said, relevant, bite-size, engaging content that you can then measure and feedback into that platform and the wider team through reports and things is incredibly powerful. And as you kind of heard, I think it'll, by proxy, then maintain your compliance levels and kind of mitigate that risk for breach. So hopefully that was kind of useful 45 minutes or so for you guys. As Alex said, if you want to pop questions in the chat, we'll absolutely follow up with you directly offline. You're welcome to get in touch directly. If you want to book a demo, then you can pop onto our website and do it through there. But hopefully that was useful, and maybe we'll speak to you in a little short while. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone, and thanks for joining again.
Thank you.